You know, they came to the tomb this morning, and in all the Gospels, the story is recorded, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that they came this day to the tomb, and they weren't really expecting anything other than to hope they could roll a stone and address his dead body. That was the thought in their mind. They really had no idea that when they came to the tomb that he wasn't in there because he was alive, that he had been risen. Now that fact speaks in so many ways into our lives. Because in so many moments of our lives, we are staring into a situation that feels like it might be a little hopeless. It feels like the opportunity is over. It feels like it's dead. It feels like it's gone. And yet it's not. There is an opportunity for us in that moment to see more than that. In fact, in the moment of their greatest tragedy, as they come to the tomb, this is actually the moment of their greatest triumph, and they don't know it. And it's been something that Jesus has been trying to get into their mind for not just days and weeks and months, but for years. He's been trying to help them understand that this is what was going to happen. He was going to go to Jerusalem, he was going to die, and he was going to rise again. But they couldn't wrap their mind around it. And here they are this morning at the tomb, still not able to fully wrap their mind around that reality. What do we do in a moment like that? What do we do when we find ourselves in a situation like they did? Well, I think what Jesus wants us to do in these kind of moments is he wants us, and it's the title of our message today, to speak faith into our great fear. And today we're talking about speaking biblical faith into the great fears that we might be experiencing in our life today. Last year we released this book that was done from our sermon series, Fear Less, and just talking about how to live with less fear in our life. But I mean, I can't think of a more fearful moment than to have been there and to have Jesus killed and then to stand there at the tomb. What a terrifying moment. Earlier in the week, on Friday of this week, he had been crucified. On Thursday night, he had spent the Last Supper with his disciples. Earlier in the week, he had been traveling throughout the temple and teaching. And last Sunday, he had come in on that donkey in triumphal entry. But I want us to take one step further back than that today. Mark 11 tells us the story of the triumphal entry, but today I want us to go back a few verses in Mark chapter 10 to that last moment when Jesus told them, hey guys, this is what's going to happen. I want you to know what's going to happen so that you can deal with it when it does happen. A moment when Jesus would speak faith into their fear, and I think hopefully today that Jesus could speak faith into our fear. The passage is in Mark chapter 10, verse 32, when it says, they were on their way up to Jerusalem. So they're going to Jerusalem. Jesus, this is that final moment. They're going to celebrate the Passover, and this is going to be when Jesus is crucified. All of this is about to happen. They're on their way with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished. Now, I made this point, and this is the fourth time I've preached this message. Every time I kind of change it up a little bit just to kind of, keep people interested, the ones who go to all the different ones. But it's one of the things that struck me as so interesting as I worked on this passage is to realize that nobody knows what this means. The disciples were astonished. Why are they astonished? And then the next verse the next part of the verse says, while those who followed were afraid. In Greek, it's the word phobeo. The noun is phobia. I mean, they were afraid. This was a fearful moment. Jesus is going to speak into their fears in this moment. Because, by the way, the thing they're afraid of is not just a fear, it's actually going to happen. It says, again, he took the 12 aside and he told them what was going to happen to him. We're going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death. They'll hand him over to the Gentiles. They'll mock him. They'll spit on him. They'll flog him. They'll kill him. 3 days later, he'll rise. I don't know, every time I read that, I think to myself, why didn't they go to the tomb this morning and go, hey, I wonder if he's going to come back? But the Gospels never tell us that. The Gospels tell us they went sad, mourning. They thought all hope was lost. But Jesus wants for us in this moment to speak faith into our fear. You know, we're afraid of so many things so many times. Sometimes we're just afraid of the dark. Sometimes we wake up in the middle of the night and we hear a sound and we're afraid. And we react to it different ways. You know, sometimes when we're afraid, we just close our eyes. We kind of go, well, I hope if I close my eyes, it'll just go away. Sometimes it works because there's really nothing to be afraid of, you know. FDR said nothing to fear but fear itself. Sometimes there's nothing to fear but fear. And so sometimes that's a good thing to do. We just kind of take it out of our mind. Sometimes we avoid it or we deny it. We sidestep it. We just try to not think about it. But what happens when the thing that we fear becomes reality? What happens when you are confronted not just with fear, but the thing that you feared, when that becomes a reality for you? How do you deal with it? You see, for the disciples in this moment on Resurrection Sunday, they weren't just afraid, they had experienced the death and crucifixion of Jesus. The thing they feared had become a reality. But how would they respond to that? Jesus wanted them to speak faith into their fear. And so I want us today to think about what would that look like. And as we look at this passage that we just talked about, it says they were on their way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus is leading the way, and the disciples are astonished. I want you to see in this passage, first of all, what I would call a matter of direction. If we're going to confront the fears of our life with resurrection faith, we're going to have to confront the reality that this is about direction. Jesus, in this moment, when the thing he feared was in front of him, he didn't go in the opposite direction. He went in the direction of the thing he feared. It says in this passage, they were on their way up. Now, that's kind of an interesting thing in the Bible. Anytime you hear them going to Jerusalem, it always describes them going up. And to understand that, I want to show you this map. We're going to put up on here on the screen. This is the land of Israel topographically. Way over to the west is the Mediterranean Sea. Over here on the right is the Jordan River Valley. And in between is this mountainous range that the city of Jerusalem sits atop. Jesus came from way up there where that little blue area is, the Sea of Galilee, and he made his way down toward Jericho. Now, some believe he took this yellow path through Samaria, met the woman at the well, and that kind of thing. But eventually he'll get to Jericho. Jericho is 850 feet below sea level. It sits in this Syrian-African rift, this rift that runs to the lowest place on the surface of the earth, down at the Dead Sea. And this is on the eastern side. On the western side is the Mediterranean Sea. By the way, does anyone know what foot level sea level is? That's a joke. It's at 0. It's a joke. It's at sea level. That's what sea level is. But over here in Jericho is 850 feet below sea level. But as you make your way up between the Mediterranean Sea and this giant rift is this mountainous range with this Jebusite fortress called Jerusalem sitting on the hills of Moriah in Zion and Scopus, the city of David. You got to go up 2,474 feet. I mean, you're going up. And the journey, they call it in the Bible, the Jericho Road, is a treacherous journey through a Judean wilderness. There's no water. It's desert. It's hot. It's a narrow little windy road where there's caverns on different sides. It's jagged. It's filled with wild animals. The point I'm trying to make to you is this. No one just winds up in Jerusalem. It's not like one day you say, I think I'm just going to go over to Jerusalem. It's just not going to happen. It's 15 miles. It takes 8 hours today to walk from Jericho to Jerusalem. You're not just going to happen to get there. For Jesus to go to Jerusalem was a matter of direction. In our life, a lot of things are about direction. This morning, when you got up, you had to make a choice about direction. Do I lay here or do I get up? When you got up, you had to make a choice. Do I go back down? When you got up, you had to make a choice about which direction you go. Are you going to go to the bathroom? Are you going to go to the kitchen? Nobody wakes up and says, you know what? I'm not going to look where I'm going. I'm just going to walk around and see what I run into. You're going to hit something. It's going to hurt. You don't do that when you get into a car. You don't just say, hey, I'm just going to drive. I don't know where I'm going to go. I'm just going to drive and see what happens. Now, I've seen some of you drive, so maybe that is true that you do that. No, we don't do that. We have a sense of direction, but can I ask you a question today? What about your life? Does your life have a sense of direction? You see, all of Jesus' life had been leading to this point, and when the cross was before him, when Jerusalem was before him, there was only one way to get up there, and he had to go up to get there, and everything in him said, hey, let's go the other way. And the disciples were astonished. And you know what? They were afraid to go that way. They didn't want to go that way. The Old Testament describes Jesus in this moment prophetically in Isaiah 50, verse 7, when it says, because the sovereign Lord helps me, I will not be disgraced. Therefore have I set my face like flint, and I know I will not be put to shame. Flint is one of the hardest stones. You know, we have rocks around here. You ever kind of dig down into the soil, and this rock is kind of soft and sandy, and it kind of crumbles and breaks apart. But this kind of stone, flint's not like that. It's one of the hardest stones. People have quarried the stones for tens of thousands of years. They've discovered Native Americans used to carve out these stones and make their arrowheads out of them and make their knives out of them. And in the ancient world, they did the same thing. They would make knives out of this stone because it would be jagged and sharp. If you took any other stone and you tried to make a knife out of it, it would just crumble apart. But this stone was so hard. Well, today, another way we would describe that in our world today is we would say it's as hard as steel. Jesus' face was, we'd say, set like steel. He steeled himself to what was in front of him. One author put it like this, that Jesus was like an army tank plowing forward unhindered by the enemy. He was moving in the direction of the thing he feared. And the whole time speaking faith and trying to do the same for his disciples, saying to them what was going to happen. Now, it's not just a matter of direction. I mean, the honest truth is it's also always a matter of destination, right? I mean, if we want to end somewhere, we've got to go in a certain direction to get there. And Jesus, it says, they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way. The way in the original language, hadas, is a word that just means the road. Jesus was leading them down the road. In the Old Testament, there's a book with the name Hadas in it, Genesis, and next comes Exodus. Exodus means out of road. Hadas, the road out of. It's the road out of Egypt. It's when God delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and redeemed them and delivered them. Except for here, Jesus isn't taking the road out of. Jesus is taking the road into. He's going up to Jerusalem. He's going toward the thing he fears. He is going toward the cross. He is headed in that direction. That is part of his destination. Now, I say to myself sometimes, because I know that Jesus was a human being, I say to myself sometimes, how did Jesus do that? I think a lot of times we say, oh, well, he was God, that's kind of, but he was fully human. How does a human being in a moment like this say to themselves, you know what? I am going to go in the direction of Jerusalem. I'm going to go in the direction of the cross. Well, the Bible has a word for this. It runs throughout the whole Bible, and it's the word faith. There's an entire chapter dedicated to faith in the book of Hebrews. It's the 11th chapter. And at the beginning of that chapter, it says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And then it talks about all sorts of people throughout the Bible, starting with Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Moses. And it goes all the way through and says all of the great men and women of the Bible were people of faith. People who did something that they couldn't see the results of it now, but had hope in something that was not yet. The chapter ends by saying, these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. In other words, they had a faith that could see beyond the circumstances and could see what was coming next. Jesus could see the cross, but he could see beyond the cross. When I was in college, I read a book by Philip Yancey called The Jesus I Never Knew, and then I read another one of his books that I really liked about disappointment with God. And in these books, Philip Yancey, this very popular Christian author, has a kind of a famous quote. He'll talk about faith, and he'll say this about faith. He'll say that faith means believing in advance what only makes sense in reverse. I can remember reading that, writing that in my Bible, and just holding on to that my whole life. Faith is believing in advance what only makes sense in reverse. That faith is something that when you're doing it, when you're going through it, it's not something that you can always explain. But when you operate in the realm of faith and you trust God and you believe God and you follow God, you can look backwards and you can see that God was guiding you through that. You can see in reverse the result of your faith. Jesus, in this moment, could see what was coming. He describes it, betrayal and death and being handed over to Gentiles, mocked and spit on, flogged and executed and resurrected. In fact, he tells them in this gospel, not once, not twice, but 3 times what's going to happen to him. The first time he did it was in Mark 8, when he was at Caesarea Philippi and Peter said, you're the Messiah, you're the Christ, you're the King. Jesus is like, yeah, that's right. And then I'm going to go to a cross and die. And Peter's like, no. In Mark chapter 8, verse 31, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And we know they didn't want to hear that then. And so Jesus said it again in Mark chapter 9, verse 31. He was teaching his disciples. He said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They'll kill him, and after 3 days he'll rise again. They didn't want to hear that again. And so here in this chapter, on the eve, on the journey to Jerusalem, when he's about to go in on this Passion Week, it's going to lead to the cross and the empty tomb, he tells them again for the 3rd time, I'm going to go through this. And they don't want to hear it. That sounds scary. That's frightening. That's fearful. But Jesus will speak truth and faith to them in this moment. And every time he does, he will end it by saying this, and after 3 days, rise again. We've gathered here on this Resurrection Sunday because he did. But he didn't have a resurrection without a crucifixion. There was no hope without death. There was no life without the sacrifice of Jesus. So how do we in our lives take his example and make it work for us? How can we speak faith into the great fears of our personal lives when we deal with them? Well, there's a word that we use sometimes. It's the word grit. A fancier word that would rhyme, or at least give me the D alliteration for a good sermon, would be determination. A matter of direction, destination, determination. It's a way to remember that today, isn't it? Jesus was being guided in the direction of God, leading to a destination beyond the cross, to an empty tomb. But to get there, he had to go there. To get there, he had to make the gritty determination that he was going to set his face like flint and head in that direction. He was going to have to choose faith, not his fear. And he was going to call everyone else to do the same thing. You know, the chapter that comes after Hebrews 11 is, get ready for this, Hebrews 12. And in Hebrews 11, which is a hall of faith, Hebrews 12 reflects back on it, and it says, since we're gathered before such a great cloud of witnesses, like all the great men and women who believed God when it was hard and gritty and tough, since we're gathered before them, he says, let us throw off everything that hinders, the sin that so easily entangles, and run the race that's been marked out for us with perseverance. And then at the beginning of verse 2 of Hebrews 12, it says this, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. What we're supposed to do as we look at all the great men and women of the Bible and the great people of faith is we're supposed to then stop and look at Jesus, because he's the ultimate example of it. He's the pioneer and perfecter of faith. The pioneer means the person that started it. You know, when this country got started in the 1776 kind of range, there was only 13 stars on the American flag, wasn't there? Just 13 states. Now we've got more than that. We've got like 50, right? How did that happen? Somebody said, let's go west. Pioneers set out across places like Mississippi, rivers, and Lewis and Clark's, and they went west. They were pioneers. They came to places like Texas. They kept on going and going and going. And some people have kind of wished they'd kind of stopped before they got to California, you know, sometimes. But they went where no one had gone before. Star Trek had a little thing about that, to go boldly where no one's gone before. They were pioneers. Jesus was a pioneer. When we needed rescue, when we needed deliverance, he came into the world. We celebrated it at Christmas. He lived among us. He taught among us. And then he moved toward the direction of the cross, trying to lead his disciples there. And on the cross, he said in English, our Bibles, it says it is finished. In Greek, it is the perfect tense. It is tetelestai. To come to the tell is to come to the end, to come to the completion, to bring it to fulfillment. He not only started faith as a pioneer, he finished the race. He perfected faith. And so when we look at his example, we have the great example. I wonder, is there anything in the Bible that tells us how Jesus did that? How could Jesus, with such determination, go in the direction of Jerusalem knowing it would be so hard? Well, this verse answers that question. It's one of the great verses of the Bible. It tells us how he did it and why he did it. It says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He was never looking at the cross. He was looking beyond it. Just as the women who came to the tomb this morning and saw that Jesus, believing that he was dead and that all hope was gone, that they should have been doing was looking beyond the death to the glorious resurrection. But to do that today, we would have to speak faith to the fears that we have. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Can I just encourage you in your life today? Choose joy. In the midst of whatever you're going through, choose joy. Jesus did. It's how he got through it. But then it says not only did he endure the cross, but he scorned the shame. Can you imagine the shame Jesus would have felt when he looked and the betrayer was Judas, one of his disciples, the denier was Peter, one of his top three? When he looked out from the cross, the religious leaders were mocking him. Perhaps people that he had healed and taught and fed with miracles walked by and said things like, in mockery, what kind of a man of God are you? Look at you now, hanging here at the cross. What shame. How did he get through that, knowing he would endure that? For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame. And then I love this. It says he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. He went up to Jerusalem. He went up to the cross. Afterwards, he went up as he ascended into heaven. And then you know what he did? He sat down. He went up, he went up, he went up. And then he sat down in glory. He was looking way beyond the circumstances he was in. He was looking with the eyes of faith beyond what he was going through to what was going to be on the other side. It was a matter of gritty determination. I remember, don't you? Most of you in the room are old enough to remember, I'm sure, September the 11th, 2001. Some of you are younger than that, and you don't. You're like my youngest son, Dash. He asked me recently to read him some of these books, these I Survived books. Some of you probably seen these little books kids read, and it's kind of like, hey, I survived an earthquake. I survived a tornado. I survived this big, great fire. These are the kind of books my kids like me to read them while they go to sleep at night. I wonder what they dream about. One of them was on 9/11. And, honestly, I was kind of reluctant to read that because like a lot of us who lived through that day, we're still traumatized by it. Our life is different because of it. But I read it to him anyway, and it was a story about a fireman, a little boy who went into New York when the Twin Towers came down, and his father was a fireman, and how he saved his life. But it also reminded the reader in this true story that a lot of people didn't survive. On that day when the Twin Towers were smoking, firemen were running into those buildings. Some of them were running in to rescue people. Some were going in not knowing they were going to die that day. That day was one that a lot of us in this country felt a sense of undeniable and palpable grief and pain and loss. But when we talked about the firemen who gave their lives, we spoke with pride. We have a word for a person who gives their life for someone else. We call them a hero. It's a four-letter word, but it's the kindest four-letter word. It's a lofty word. To call someone a hero is something that leaves a feeling in your throat, a feeling in your gut. But what's amazing is that every hero in the back of their mind in one way or another probably hopes that they're somehow going to get out of it alive. And what's amazing about Jesus in this moment is he knew one thing was certain. There was no way to get out of it alive. There was no way to accomplish the mission and for Jesus to be okay at the end of it. He would have to die. And that's an incredible thing to realize. As I read this passage this week, though, and this is something I skipped over and want to leave at the very end. It's verse 33. Somebody called this the scariest verse in the Bible. Because if you didn't notice it, Jesus did not say, I am going to Jerusalem. Verse 33, he said, we are going to Jerusalem. This is a reminder that Jesus wasn't just going to die on the cross and rise from the dead. We love that about this weekend. We know that he is our Savior. We're so glad Jesus went that way. But he says to his disciples, we go. To be a follower of Christ, to be a disciple of Christ, to be a Christian is more than behavior. It is more than being born in a Christian family or showing up at a Christian church. It is more than the way we often characterize Christianity. Christianity at its very root, discipleship at its very root is this question: am I following Jesus? In the day that he lived, there were a lot of people that followed the rules. There were a lot of people that knew the Bible. In fact, some of them were the people who were crucifying him. Christianity and discipleship is more than just behavior. And it's possible on this Easter Sunday, as you're gathered here in church, you're kind of going, well, I know I'm a Christian, but I'm asking you a question right now, and that question is this: are you actually following Jesus? Is he actually leading your life? Is he directing your decisions? Are you following him, or are you following something else? Now, to follow Jesus in this moment for the disciples was two things. It was astonishing and it was scary. But you know what else it was? It was the only way that would lead to eternal life. How can we speak faith into our great fears? Sometimes we sing a song on Easter that says, because he lives. Because he lives. Because Jesus Christ has been raised from the dead. If I face my greatest fear today, my greatest fear is death, my greatest fear is the loss of things that matter to me. Because he lives, I know that death is not the end. Because I know that there is a reward that waits for me. Because of that, I can live with faith in the midst of even the most difficult thing. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. So what do we do? What do we do with this fear? Well, I want you just to take it for a moment, whatever your fear is, whatever you brought in here, whatever has been percolating and kind of stirring inside of you, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's situations that have been created by it, whether it's the situation that's happening in the world, whether it's on the news, or whatever it is, that thing that's just pressing on your mind and wakes you up in the middle of the night, that just lurks around inside your head and just won't leave you alone. I want you to take that fear today. I just want you to hold it in your hand, and I want you symbolically to give it to Jesus. Just hold it out, give it to Jesus. And as you're holding it out, giving it to Jesus, I want you just to speak the words of faith over it. I don't know what those words are. I mean, if you're afraid of death, God, I know you're bigger than death. If you're afraid of what's going to happen, God, I know that you're in charge. I know that you have it worked out in your great plan. What is your fear today? Would you take it and would you speak faith to it in this moment? Would you bow with me for just a moment? Father, as we present our fears to you on this day of hope and faith and resurrection, God, as we bring our burdens to you, as we cast our cares upon you, as Scripture says, because you care for us, we're reminded that you do. God, you didn't want your disciples to be scared as they came to the cross. You wanted to give them hope. You wanted to give them faith. You wanted them to see beyond the cross. God, you wanted them to have joy in the midst of what they're going through. And Father, my prayer today is for the people here and those watching, that they would choose joy in this moment. They would look beyond that thing that is holding them back, that is holding them down. And God, in this moment, they would speak words of faith because you are risen. You are risen indeed. In Jesus' name, amen.